Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. So the Trump-Putin meeting has come and gone, and this Monday, all eyes will be on another big set of meetings. Ukrainian President Zelensky back in the White House, but he's not coming alone. He'll be joined by the leaders of Britain, Finland, France, Italy, Germany, as well as the heads of NATO and the European Commission. It is a real united front. How will Trump respond? In a moment, two expert guests will help us make sense of what happened in Alaska last Friday and where things might head next. We've received a lot of mail from our subscribers around the world. I will try to channel the best questions in this conversation. If you're not a subscriber yet, use the code FP Live for a discount. We are also a podcast. Just look for FP Live on your favorite audio platform. So here's the main thing we know from Friday's meeting between the presidents of Russia and the United States in Alaska. There was no agreement on a ceasefire deal, which was the basic starting point for Ukraine and Europe. Putin's proposal is that he'd accept a peace deal if he could claim all of the Donbass, a region that includes Donetsk and Luhansk. Ukraine still controls, crucially, 2,500 square miles of territory there. And in exchange, according to Trump envoy Stephen Witkoff doing the rounds of TV talk shows yesterday on Sunday, the United States might provide security guarantees for Ukraine, the likes of which it offers Japan or South Korea. Not quite NATO membership, but an actual guarantee. Who knows whether that will happen? All of that is what we've learned so far. The question now, as Zelensky and European leaders head to the White House, is what they ask for, and also how long negotiations might take, given that we don't have a ceasefire. And just this morning, there were more attacks on Ukraine. I have two terrific guests. Andrea Kendall-Taylor has served as a CIA analyst focused on Russia and is now a senior fellow at the Center for New American Security. And Sergey Radchenko is a historian of the Cold War who teaches at Johns Hopkins University. He is the author of To Run the World, the Kremlin's Cold War Bid for Global Power. Welcome, both of you. I'm going to look back a bit before we look ahead. Andrea, I was so struck by the image of Trump receiving Putin on Friday on a literal red carpet, clapping his hands, and then they both got into the presidential car, the Beast. Putin is, of course, a war criminal, and we know both he and Trump care a lot about the value of imagery, of symbolism. Reflect a bit on the scenes we saw on Friday.
I think they're nothing short of remarkable. I mean, as you said, there was such pageantry associated with the visit. And it was quite shocking to see the way that President Trump welcomed the Russian leader. I mean, I think, many people who don't see a problem in communicating and using diplomacy through crises even recognize that, yes, talking is okay, talking can be good, but you don't have to applaud and clap and celebrate the arrival of a war criminal. So that was really shocking. And I'll say I'm actually sitting in Europe right now and talking with many European colleagues. From their perspective, the imagery that came out of the summit was nothing short of shocking as well. And I think really undermines perceptions also of US leadership and really has called into question where the US is heading and its reliability as a partner. So it really did send shockwaves through our alliance.
Sergey, let me bring you in. You are so steeped in Soviet history. So much of this summit, it felt like a blast from the past.
Ravi, it did, and this is what it was intended to do from Russia's perspective. Putin went to Alaska to stand in glory next to the American president. That, of course, is something that he craves, that he wanted for a long time. This recognition as America's equal and as almost higher than the Europeans, for whom this summit, of course, was a disaster. But the fact that Putin was there, Europeans were not represented there, obviously gave Putin that sort of standing, that sort of prestige, that sort of confidence to tell his domestic audience, look, they try to shun us, but they could not do that anymore. And here I am, and Russia is standing here in glory. So I think there is a historical tradition here going all the way to Cold War summitry meetings of Soviet and American leaders, which for the Soviets always represented an opportunity to raise their country up and to show it as one of the great players, great powers in the world.
And they care so much about recognition as well globally. Andrea, let's move to outcomes from what we saw, what has emerged on Friday and then trickled into the news on Saturday and Sunday. At the press conference on Friday, it was telling to me that neither Trump nor Putin took questions from reporters. They were quite vague in their remarks. But what we now know is that they are skirting around a ceasefire as a first step and talking about going straight to a peace deal. This as Putin is continuing his attacks on Ukraine even this morning. What's your sense? And I know a lot could change in the next few days. Did Trump get played here?
I think that without a doubt. And I think, many people now see with the summit that like the worst fears of the analytic community going into the summit now appear to be in play. So number one, it was just the pageantry that we talked about. So Putin was able to secure this meeting on US soil with a US leader. He stood on the stage during the press conference and parroted his view of the war, how it started and what it's about without any rebuttal from the US president. He was able to, we'll see what happens today with the meeting with Zelensky, but one of the things that I fear the most is that he was successful in driving a wedge between the US on the one hand and Europe and Ukraine on the other by now putting the impetus back on the Ukrainians. I mean, I think that was one of the key goals that Putin had coming into this was to say yes, but appear pragmatic, appear like he was ready to make a deal, and then frame the Ukrainians as the one being the barrier to peace. And I fear that's where we sit today. And quite notably, there were no concessions from the Russian side and no pressure, no sanctions. And so it really was a great success, I think, for President Putin in that, yeah, he's shifting the onus back onto the Ukrainians, raising the risk that the United States reapplies pressure to Ukraine, while also buying more time to prosecute this war. So all in all, I think it was a big win for the Russians, a big loss for Ukraine, and a big loss for the Europeans, because as you said, Ravi, one of the key points the Europeans thought they had secured was that there must be a ceasefire before any discussions of territory or concessions. And again, that's, Trump, that flew out the window as well. So, I think the Europeans thought they were in a good place. And it turns out, I think that was a little overly optimistic. And Trump was willing to kind of to sell that out and take Putin's side. So I also think it is a setback for the transatlantic relationship as well. And we'll see how they hold up in the White House today.
And the other thing here is no matter how this goes in the next 2 or 3 days, Putin retains the right not only to continue attacking Ukraine, but to kick the can down the road for weeks or months. In many senses, we're back to square one on that front. Sergey, when Putin said the only way to get to a settlement in his speech on Friday is to, quote, eliminate all the primary roots of the conflict, and also to consider what he called legitimate concerns, another phrase there that he's used before. I was reminded of your book, To Run the World. Those could have been the words of Stalin or Khrushchev. Talk to us a bit about the significance of those phrases that he was using.
So it's very typical, very common. In Soviet history, the Soviets felt that they were entitled to what they called a legitimate sphere of interest in Europe. The problem, of course, was, beginning with Stalin, is that others did not think, namely the United States did not think that the sphere was legitimate. Hence, you have the Cold War, because the Soviets say, well, this is our legitimate interest. The Americans say, well, how possibly can those your control of Eastern Europe be legitimate? So you have basically effectively a confrontation. However, it should be said that around 1944 there was a moment, 1944-45, from the percentages agreement to the Yalta conference, where there was an effort by the British and the Americans to kind of say, okay, maybe this are your interests, etc. And then during the Cold War, 56, 68, when the Soviets invaded Hungary, Czechoslovakia, the American reaction was basically, yeah, what's yours is yours. We're not going to worry about it. What's different in Ukraine is that since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, there has been a pushback from the Europeans and from the Americans saying, this is not in your sphere of interest. And of course, the fact that the Ukrainians themselves proved on the ground that they could withstand the Russian aggression also basically disproved Putin's allegations. But he's trying to come back to this. And that's why he's pushing his idea about Ukraine's non-involvement in NATO. That's one of his core conditions, right? The fact that the Ukrainians should not be allowed to enter NATO. And I think Trump has bought that, judging from his reaction after Alaska. Trump is agreeable to that. But there are a bunch of other things. Like, for example, Russia is trying to impose particular kinds of laws on Ukraine in relation to the Orthodox Church, in relation to the Russian language. It wants Ukraine demilitarized, which means it would not be able to resist any further Russian aggression. And that, for Putin, would basically set the parameters of Ukraine being effectively not necessarily annexed by Russia, whatever remains of it, but being something like Belarus. In other words, deferring to Russia. This is what he wants.